After 40 years, my husband introduced me to his girlfriend, and I introduced myself as the new boss of his company. For 40 years, my world had a very specific, comfortable shape. It was the shape of our sprawling brick colonial in the leafy suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. It was the shape of the 2 empty bedrooms upstairs, rooms that once echoed with the laughter of our children and now held their childhoods like museums. Most of all, it was the shape of my husband, Robert. For 40 years, I had molded my life around him, becoming the perfect support system, the flawless hostess, the quiet, steadfast wife of a man on the rise. Robert Miller, Senior Vice President at Sterling Solutions. My Robert. Our life looked like a brochure for the American dream. We were in our early 60s, still healthy, with a beautiful home, a portfolio that our financial advisor called robust, and a shared history that felt as solid as the old oak trees lining our street. I'd given up a promising career in financial analysis to raise our kids, a decision I never truly regretted. Managing our home, our social lives, and creating a perfect sanctuary for Robert to return to after his high-pressure days at the firm, that became my career. And I was good at it. When people looked at us, they saw success. They saw permanence. I know I did. Then, 3 weeks ago, the foundation of that world cracked. My father passed away. He wasn't an easy man. Arthur Sterling was reclusive, difficult, and more comfortable with complex engineering blueprints than he was with people, including his own daughter. He was the brilliant, eccentric founder of Sterling Solutions, the company that had given Robert his entire career. After my mother died, he withdrew even further, living in his quiet, book-filled mansion on the other side of town, communicating more with his lawyers than with me. Robert was the picture of a supportive son-in-law. He handled the arrangements, his voice a somber, respectful bass as he spoke to the funeral director. He held my hand at the service, his grip firm. He was a titan, Catherine, he'd murmur, looking at the casket, a true legend. The whole industry is in mourning, but even in my grief, I could see something else in his eyes, a glint of calculation, an energy that had nothing to do with sorrow. He was already looking past the funeral, past my father's grave, and toward the gaping power vacuum at the top of Sterling Solutions. Arthur had never named a successor. For years, Robert had been his number 2, the heir apparent in everything but name. Now he saw his chance. The CEO position was finally within his grasp. What Robert didn't know, what no one knew, was that my complicated, distant father had left behind one final, stunning surprise. A week after the funeral, I was sitting in a sterile, frighteningly quiet conference room at my father's law firm. His lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies with eyes that seemed to hold 100 secrets, pushed a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished mahogany table toward me. "Catherine," he said, his voice gentle, "your father's will is unconventional. He had a great deal of respect for your intelligence, even if he didn't show it. He always said you had the Sterling mind." I just nodded, my hands trembling in my lap. I was expecting to hear about the house, his stock portfolio, maybe a trust fund. I was not prepared for what came next. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. He was wary of Robert's ambition. He respected his drive, but worried it wasn't tempered by the right principles. So, he made a decision. He has left his entire controlling interest in Sterling Solutions, all 51% of the shares, to you. Exclusively and irrevocably. The air left my lungs. The words didn't make sense. Me? I was the woman who organized charity luncheons and picked out new drapes. What did I know about running a multi-million-dollar engineering firm? I started to protest, to say there had to be a mistake, but Mr. Davies held up a hand. "There's no mistake, Catherine. You are, as of the execution of this will, the majority shareholder and the ultimate authority at the company. The board of directors has been discreetly informed. They are waiting for your direction." I walked out of that office in a daze. The Charlotte humidity felt thicker, heavier. The world looked the same, but it wasn't. I was no longer just Catherine Miller, Robert's wife. I was Catherine Sterling Miller, the owner of my husband's entire professional world, and he had absolutely no idea. A strange duality took over my life. By day, I was the grieving daughter, quietly sorting through my father's belongings, putting on a brave face for concerned friends. I'd listen as Robert came home, loosening his tie and talking endlessly about the restructuring and the strategic alignments happening at the office. He'd complain about the board being indecisive and the need for strong, unwavering leadership. "They're dragging their feet on naming a new CEO," he'd vent, pacing our kitchen, his reflection moving across the dark granite countertops. "It's creating instability. The stakeholders are getting nervous. It should be me, Catherine. Everyone knows it should be me." I would just nod, murmuring, "I'm sure they'll make the right decision, honey." But at night, after he was asleep, a different Catherine emerged. I would sit in my study, a glass of water at my side, my laptop open. My father's will had granted me access to everything. I had secure logins, confidential reports, and direct lines to the board members. I started having quiet, late-night video calls with the chairman of the board, an old friend of my father's named George. I spent hours poring over financial statements, project proposals, and personnel reports. The numbers, the strategies, it was a language I hadn't spoken in 40 years. But it came back to me surprisingly fast, like a long-forgotten mother tongue. The sterling mind, my father had called it. Maybe he was right. I was grieving, yes, but I was also learning. Quietly, secretly, I was stepping into the shoes my father had left for me. Then, last night, everything shifted. Robert came home with that familiar glint in his eye, but it was sharper this time. He found me on the sun porch reading a quarterly earnings report I had disguised on my tablet as a new novel. He kissed the top of my head. It felt more like a formality than an act of affection. "Catherine," he said, his tone overly serious, "with everything that's happened, your father's passing, the stress at the company, I think we need to talk, properly talk, about us, about our future." My heart did a slow, nervous flip. "Okay," I said, looking up at him. "What do you want to talk about?" "Not here," he said, waving a hand dismissively at our comfortable home. "I want to do this right. I made a reservation for us. Saturday night at the Fig Tree. Just the two of us. It's important." The Fig Tree, one of the fanciest, most expensive restaurants in the city. The kind of place you go for a major anniversary or a monumental deal. A place for life-changing conversations. A cold knot formed in my stomach, but I kept my face placid. He was framing this as something for us, something to reconnect after a difficult time. But his eyes were distant, and his corporate speak about our future felt chillingly impersonal. He didn't want to reconnect, he wanted to close a deal. And a terrible, sinking feeling told me that I was the asset being liquidated. But I simply smiled the way a supportive wife does. "That sounds lovely, Robert," I said, my voice as smooth as cream. "I'll look forward to it." It started with the little things, the tiny cracks in the 40-year-old foundation of our life. After Robert suggested that serious talk at the Fig Tree, his behavior shifted in ways that felt both foreign and deeply unsettling. For 4 decades, I knew the rhythm of this man like my own heartbeat. Now, there was a strange, discordant note in the melody. His phone, which used to be left carelessly on the kitchen counter or the nightstand, was now his constant companion. He'd angle the screen away from me if I walked past, and I'd see him quickly swipe a notification away. When I casually asked, he'd mutter something about sensitive merger details from Sterling Solutions. It sounded plausible, and for a while I let it be. My father's death was still a raw, open wound, and I knew the pressure on Robert at the company was immense. I told myself he was just stressed, grieving in his own way, focused on securing the CEO position he'd coveted for so long. Then came the late nights, board dinners, strategy sessions with the executive team, finalizing the merger proposal. The excuses were always smooth, wrapped in the corporate jargon I'd heard for years, but they were coming more frequently. 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. He'd come home smelling not of the stale office air I knew so well, but of something else, an expensive cologne I didn't recognize, and the faint, sweet scent of a perfume that was definitely not mine. I would lie in our king-sized bed, the space beside me cold for hours, and I'd try to rationalize it. He's working hard for our future, I'd tell myself. This is the final push. But a cold dread began to pool in my stomach, a feeling I hadn't had since I was a teenager worrying about a boy who didn't call. The denial I'd wrapped myself in began to shred when the joint credit card statement arrived. I always handled our finances. It was part of the domestic empire I had so carefully managed while he built his corporate one. My eyes scanned the familiar list of charges: the organic grocery store, the hardware store, our favorite local coffee shop. And then, a charge that made my breath catch in my throat. $3,000 at Eternity Gems, a high-end jewelry boutique downtown that was known for modern, delicate pieces favored by a much younger crowd. I had never been there. He hadn't bought me jewelry in a decade, not since a perfectly nice, if uninspired, tennis bracelet for our 30th anniversary. My mind raced. A gift for a client? A retirement present for a colleague? Every excuse felt thin, transparent. A few lines down, more unfamiliar names. Dinners at trendy, expensive restaurants like Eris and the Porter's House, places a 62-year-old man set in his steak and potatoes ways would never choose on his own. I tried to confront him, gently. One evening, as he was unknotting his tie, I held up the statement. "Robert, what's this charge from Eternity Gems?" He didn't even flinch. He glanced at it, tossing his jacket on a chair. "Oh, that. Corporate gift for one of the Japanese investors. Part of the merger deal. It's all about relationships, Catherine. You know that." He said it with such casual authority that for a moment I almost believed him. Almost. The final, flimsy wall of my denial came crashing down a week later. I was gathering his suits for the dry cleaners when a small folded receipt fell from the inner pocket of his favorite navy blazer. It wasn't a Sterling Solutions expense receipt. It was from a boutique hotel in Asheville, the Whispering Pines Inn. It was for a 2-night stay in the Sweetheart Suite. The date was from a weekend 2 weeks prior, a weekend he had supposedly spent at a mandatory leadership retreat in Raleigh. My fingers trembled as I held the paper. I could picture it all. The scenic drive up the Blue Ridge Parkway, the cozy fireplace in the room, the 2 champagne flutes he must have ordered. The sick feeling in my stomach wasn't just dread anymore. It was the sharp, physical pain of betrayal. 40 years. 40 years of birthdays, anniversaries, raising children, burying parents. 40 years of me packing his suitcases for business trips, ironing his shirts, being the silent, supportive partner. All of it felt like a lie. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The heartache, the nauseating feeling of being made a fool of, it was all there. But beneath it, a new feeling began to crystallize. A cold, hard, calculating anger. The tears I expected to fall never came. Instead, my mind became terrifyingly clear. He thought I was just the wife, the homemaker, a relic of a life he was ready to discard. He had no idea that my father, a man who saw Robert's ambition for the hollow thing it was, had left me the one thing Robert wanted more than anything in the world: control of the company. The next morning, I didn't ask him about Asheville. I didn't mention the receipt. I simply smiled, handed him his coffee, and told him I had a few errands to run. My first errand was a call to Charles Albright, my father's most trusted board member and lawyer. I didn't tell him my suspicions. I simply used the authority my father had given me. "Charles," I said, my voice steady and firm, "as the new majority shareholder, I'm initiating a full-spectrum review of executive-level spending for the last quarter. I want to see all expense reports for the senior vice presidents and their direct reports. Please have HR compile them and send them to my personal, secure email by the end of the day. This is a top-level directive." There was a brief pause on the line, and then, "Of course, Catherine, consider it done." That evening, I sat in my father's old home office, now my home office, the one Robert never entered, and opened the encrypted files. And there it was, in black and white. Trip after trip, filed under Client Development and Merger Strategy. Flights to San Diego, Chicago, Miami. and on every single one, a second ticket and a second hotel room booked for a consultant, Jessica Riley. A quick search of the company directory brought up her photo. She was 28, with bright, hungry eyes and a triumphant smile, a junior marketing associate. I saw the receipts for her meals, her expenses, all rubber-stamped with Robert's signature. And then, the final insult. A signed document authorizing an off-cycle performance bonus for her, for $50,000, for exceptional contributions to merger outreach. I felt my blood run cold. This wasn't just a fling. This was a systematic drain on the company, my company, to fund his secret life. But I needed a final piece of evidence. I needed to see it. Using my new administrator-level credentials, the ones Robert didn't know I had, I accessed the security feed for the executive parking garage from the previous day. I fast-forwarded to the end of the workday. I watched as Robert walked to his car, and then I saw her, Jessica, waiting by a concrete pillar. He didn't even look around. He walked right up to her, put his briefcase down, and kissed her. It wasn't a hesitant, stolen moment. It was a long, confident kiss, the kind you give someone who belongs to you. Watching them on that grainy feed, my heartbreak burned away completely, leaving behind something as hard and clear as a diamond. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the laptop. I simply closed it. I stopped asking Robert where he'd been. I stopped looking for clues. I became the perfect, placid wife once more, which seemed to put him at ease. He saw my quietness as defeat. He had no idea I was spending 12 hours a day in my office, devouring quarterly reports, personnel files, and strategic plans, with Charles Albright on speed dial guiding me. The board, who at first were wary, were now quietly impressed. "You have your father's head for this, Catherine," Charles had said just yesterday. So when Robert came to me that evening, a smug, faintly pitying look on his face, and said, "Cat, are we still on for the fig tree tomorrow night? We really need to have that talk," I gave him the warmest, most genuine smile he'd seen in weeks. I placed my hand on his arm, a gesture I had performed 1,000,000 times. "Of course, darling," I said, my voice as smooth as silk. "I'm looking forward to it. A talk about our future is long overdue." The drive to the fig tree was silent, but it was a loud, suffocating silence. Robert kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel of his polished Lexus, his posture rigid, like a man heading to a difficult negotiation, not dinner with his wife of 4 decades. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands folded over the clutch in my lap, feeling the texture of the cool leather. I watched the familiar streets of Charlotte slide by, the oak trees draped in Spanish moss looking like weary ghosts under the streetlights. Every mile brought us closer to the end. I knew it, but he had no idea that I knew. We were seated at a quiet corner table, draped in a crisp white linen tablecloth that felt as starched and formal as Robert's demeanor. The restaurant was the kind he loved: dim lighting, hushed conversations, the discreet clinking of expensive silverware. It was a place designed for secrets and serious pronouncements. He ordered a sparkling water with a twist of lime for both of us, a somber choice that screamed, "This isn't a celebration." He cleared his throat, arranging his fork and knife with painstaking precision. It was his tell, the little ritual he performed before delivering what he considered to be important, unassailable news at a board meeting. "Catherine," he began, his voice low and practiced. "We've had an incredible journey together. 40 years, it's a lifetime. We've built a family, a home, a real legacy." I just looked at him, my expression neutral. I'd spent the last 2 weeks practicing this in the mirror, not a mask of anger, not of sadness, but of placid, impenetrable calm. It was driving him nuts. "But relationships, like any long-term investment, have a life cycle," he continued, fully launching into his pre-rehearsed speech. He stared at a point just over my shoulder, as if addressing an invisible shareholder. "And I think we've reached a point where we've mutually depreciated our emotional assets. Our forward-looking strategies, they've begun to diverge. Depreciated our emotional assets." The phrase hung in the air between us, so cold and transactional it was breathtaking. This was how he was ending a 40-year marriage. Not with regret, not with tears, but with language stripped from a quarterly earnings report. I thought of the scraped knees I'd bandaged, the sleepless nights with sick children, the thousands of dinners I'd made to support his career. All of it reduced to a line item on a balance sheet he was closing out. My heart didn't break. It had already done that when I watched the security footage from the executive parking garage. No, this was different. My heart was turning to ice, solidifying into something cold, hard, and sharp. "I will always care for you, Kat. You're the mother of my children," he said, his voice softening with phony compassion. "I'll make sure you're comfortable. The settlement will be generous. But I've found a new synergy. Someone who aligns with my personal growth trajectory." Synergy. That's what he called her. As he said the word, his eyes flickered towards the restaurant's entrance. On cue. It was all a script, a horribly choreographed corporate takedown of a marriage. And there she was. She was young, probably not even 30, blonde, dressed in a tight crimson dress that was just a little too bold for the subdued elegance of the fig tree. She moved with a triumphant sway in her hips, her eyes scanning the room before landing on our table. A bright, predatory smile bloomed on her face as she approached. This was Jessica, the junior marketing associate from his expense reports, the other half of the romantic getaway to Asheville. She looked at me not with hostility, but with a kind of patronizing pity, the way a winner looks at the person they've just defeated. Robert stood, a relieved smile spreading across his own face. "Catherine," he said, his voice filled with the false bravado of a man who thinks he's being modern and honest. "I want you to meet Jessica. We're in love, and I wanted to be honest with you about our future." He expected me to shrink, to cry, to make a scene, or perhaps just stare in quiet, dignified shock before retreating. He expected the wife he had known for 40 years, the woman who had always smoothed things over, the quiet support system. He did not get her. I let the silence hang for a moment, watching the smug confidence on their faces. Then I smiled. It wasn't the tight, pained smile of a woman betrayed. It was a warm, brilliant smile, full of genuine energy. I saw a flicker of confusion in Robert's eyes. I stood up, my movement smooth and deliberate, and extended my hand to the girl. "Jessica, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," I said, my voice rich and pleasant. My handshake was firm. Her hand, in contrast, felt small and a little clammy. Her confident smile faltered, replaced by a look of bewilderment. "I'm Catherine Sterling Miller. I've been reviewing your personnel file this week." The color drained from her face. The word Sterling landed like a physical blow. She tried to pull her hand back, but I held it for a second longer, my smile never wavering. Then I let go and turned my gaze to my husband. The warmth vanished from my face, replaced by an Arctic chill that made the restaurant's air conditioning feel tropical. My voice, when I spoke, was no longer pleasant. It was crystalline, clear, and it carried in the quiet dining room. Several people at nearby tables paused their conversations to look over. "And Robert," I said, looking directly into his eyes. He was staring at me as if he'd never seen me before. "After 40 years, you introduced me to your girlfriend. How transparent of you." I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. "Allow me to reintroduce myself to you. As of last week, following the reading of my father's will, I am the new majority shareholder and CEO of Sterling Solutions." His jaw went slack. The carefully constructed mask of the powerful executive shattered, revealing the panicked, clueless man beneath. I leaned in just slightly, my voice dropping to a low, precise whisper that was meant only for him. "So, no, Robert, you didn't just introduce me to your girlfriend. You introduced your boss." I calmly placed a crisp $200 bill on the small, polished table, more than enough to cover our untouched entrees and the bottle of sparkling water. The sound of the paper money hitting the wood was a soft, definitive thud in the suddenly cavernous silence of the fig tree's private dining area. Robert's face was a study in disbelief, his jaw hanging slightly open, his skin a pasty, mottled gray under the restaurant's artful lighting. Jessica, his little synergy, looked like a deer caught in the blinding headlights of an oncoming freight train. Her triumphant smirk had curdled into pure, unadulterated panic. I didn't offer another word. I didn't need to. The bomb had been deployed, and its shockwave was still expanding. I simply picked up my purse, gave a polite, almost imperceptible nod to the stunned waiter hovering nearby, and walked away. My heels clicked a steady, unhurried rhythm on the hardwood floor, a sound that echoed the new, resolute beat of my own heart. I didn't look back. I knew what I would see, the wreckage of a 40-year lie, sitting right there next to the breadbasket. The drive home to the house we had shared for decades was surreal. The Charlotte streets were familiar, but I saw them through new eyes. It wasn't our house anymore, it was my house. Everything was mine. The weekend was not for celebration, it was for preparation. While Robert was likely stumbling through a haze of confusion and rage, I was on secure video calls with the company's legal team and the interim board chairman. They had been briefed on the situation. My father, in his quiet, calculating wisdom, had not only left me the company, but had also left me a team of loyalists who knew Robert's ambition for the poison it was. They were ready. I spent Saturday and Sunday poring over logistics, strategy documents, and the speech I would give. I wasn't just taking over a company, I was reclaiming a legacy. My father's legacy. Monday morning arrived, bright and crisp. I walked into the gleaming glass and steel lobby of Sterling Solutions not as Robert Miller's quiet, supportive wife, but as Catherine Sterling Miller, the majority shareholder. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension and whispered rumors. At 8 a.m. sharp, an email, drafted by legal and approved by me, went out to every single employee in the global organization. It was short, professional, and brutal in its efficiency. Effective immediately, by directive of the Board of Directors and the Sterling Estate, Catherine Sterling Miller has assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Solutions. An all-hands meeting will be held in the main atrium at 10 a.m. At 10 a.m., I stood on a small temporary stage, looking out at a sea of hundreds of faces. I saw confusion, curiosity, and, in some corners, outright fear. My eyes scanned the crowd until I found him. Robert was standing in the back, near the executive elevators, his face a thunderous mask of fury. He thought I was a ghost at the feast. He didn't realize I owned the entire banquet. I started my speech by paying tribute to my father, the founder of it all. I talked about his vision, his integrity, and his commitment to innovation. Then, I laid out my own vision for the future, a future of growth, stability, and renewed focus on the engineering excellence that had made us a leader in the first place. I spoke with a confidence I never knew I possessed, a voice honed by years of listening, of absorbing, of being underestimated. I never mentioned Robert. I never mentioned a change in senior leadership. In the narrative of the company's future, he was simply erased. As I finished, a wave of applause, tentative at first, then growing in strength, filled the atrium. People want stability. They want a leader. I had just become one. Colleagues who had slapped Robert on the back for years suddenly couldn't meet his eyes, their gazes darting towards me, their expressions shifting to ones of respect and deference. Robert, of course, did not go quietly. The whispers started almost immediately. Word got back to me through a loyal department head that Robert was making the rounds. He was cornering senior vice presidents he considered allies, telling them I was unqualified, a grieving widow having a breakdown. He claimed my father had Parkinson's-related dementia and wasn't of sound mind when he wrote the will. His final, desperate play was to tell them he had a verbal promise from my father that the company would be his, and he was preparing a massive lawsuit to contest the inheritance. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt to sow chaos and claw back some of his lost power. For a moment, a cold flicker of uncertainty touched me. Lawsuits were messy, expensive, and could drag on for years. But then, the final piece fell into place. On Tuesday afternoon, my new executive assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Miller," she said, her voice hesitant. A Ms. Jessica Moore from marketing is here. She says it's urgent, and she must speak with you privately." I had them show her into a small, sterile conference room, not my office. I wanted the setting to be neutral, impersonal. She walked in, a shadow of the triumphant young woman from the restaurant. Her designer outfit seemed to hang off her, and her eyes were red-rimmed and wide with fear. She was clutching her purse like a life raft. "Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Miller," she stammered, wringing her hands. I just watched her, my expression unreadable. I didn't offer her a seat. Seeing she would get no comfort from me, she quickly got to the point. "Robert, he's finished, isn't he?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He has no power, nothing." "That is an accurate assessment," I replied, my voice even and cold. Her resolve hardened, the fear in her eyes replaced by a sharp, transactional glint. This wasn't about remorse, it was about survival. "He made me a lot of promises," she said, a bitter edge to her voice. "He said he was going to be CEO. He said we'd have everything. It was all a lie." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small metallic flash drive, placing it on the polished table between us. It looked so insignificant. "What is this?" I asked. "It's my insurance policy," she said, taking a shaky breath. Robert was careless. He used his corporate card for everything, but that was just the surface. He taught me how he funneled real money. Falsified expense reports for conferences that never happened. Payments to shell marketing companies that were just P.O. boxes he controlled. He was financing our entire life, the trips, the jewelry, the down payment on the condo he promised me, with company money. He said it was just a rounding error, that he deserved it. It's all on here, scanned receipts, bank transfer records, emails, proof of embezzlement. Enough to send him away for a very long time. I looked from the flash drive to her terrified, desperate face. She had just handed me the weapon I needed to end this war for good. Robert wasn't just an unfaithful husband anymore. He was a criminal, and I had the proof. I never believed in revenge. My mother taught me that holding on to anger was like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You're the one who gets burned. But as I stood before the mirror, adjusting the collar of my charcoal gray blazer, I realized this wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. It was about righting a 40-year-old equation that had been tipped so far in Robert's favor. I'd almost forgotten what level ground felt like. Jessica's flash drive, a tiny, unassuming silver rectangle, sat heavy in my briefcase. It was the key, the final, irrefutable number on a balance sheet I was about to close out for good. The meeting wasn't held in my new office. I chose Boardroom 3C, a sterile, impersonal space reserved for uncomfortable negotiations. The long mahogany table was so polished you could see your reflection in it, a distorted, wavy version of yourself. I had Mr. Davies, our head of legal, and another senior board member, a stoic woman named Eleanor Vance, with me. We sat on one side, a united front. The other side of the table was empty, save for a single leather-bound folder and a bottle of water. When Robert walked in, he still carried a sliver of his old arrogance. He'd been frozen out for a week, his emails unanswered, his key card to the executive floor deactivated. He probably thought this was his chance to negotiate a golden parachute, to threaten lawsuits and walk away with a fortune. He nodded curtly at Mr. Davies and Eleanor, his eyes finally landing on me. There was confusion in them and a flicker of something else, annoyance that I was even present. "Catherine," he started, his voice attempting a tone of authority. "I'm not sure what this is all about, but if it's about a severance package..." Mr. Davies cut him off, smoothly. "Please, Robert, have a seat." Robert hesitated, then sat down opposite us. The sheer size of the table between us felt like a canyon. Mr. Davies didn't waste time. "Robert, we've come into possession of certain financial records," he began, his voice calm and methodical. He opened the folder. Specifically, records detailing unauthorized fund transfers, fraudulent expense reports, and the creation of shadow vendor accounts over a period of 5 years. The total comes to approximately $1.2 million, funneled from company accounts for personal use. I watched Robert's face. The performance was masterful. First, the mask of confusion. Then, the blustering indignation. "This is absurd. Slander. I have no idea what you're talking about." That was my cue. I said nothing, but simply took the small silver flash drive from my briefcase and placed it gently on the polished table. I slid it across. It made a soft, scratching sound as it traveled the 20 feet between us. It stopped right in front of him. "This flash drive contains copies of everything," Mr. Davies continued, his tone unchanged. "Bank statements, encrypted emails you sent from your work computer detailing the transfers, receipts for jewelry, cash withdrawals made during your business trips to the Cayman Islands. It's exhaustive." Robert stared at the drive as if it were a venomous snake. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty gray pallor. The arrogant senior VP evaporated before my eyes, replaced by a scared, cornered man. The fight went out of him so fast it was like a candle being snuffed out. "We have two options for you," Mr. Davies said, closing his folder with a soft click. "Option A. We turn all of this over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Given the evidence, you'll be facing multiple counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. Federal charges." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle in the silent room. "Option B. You sign this." He slid a second, thicker folder across the table. "This is a resignation agreement and an addendum to your divorce settlement. In it, you resign effective immediately. You forfeit all unvested stock options, your entire 401k and pension plan, and relinquish any and all claims to marital assets derived from this company. That includes the house, the cars, and the art collection. You walk away with your personal effects and nothing else. You will also sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. In return, the company will not pursue criminal charges." Robert's hands were shaking as he reached for the folder. He was a shell of the man who had condescendingly explained synergy to me over dinner just a week ago. I didn't feel a surge of victory, I just felt quiet. It was the quiet of a storm that had finally passed, leaving a strange hollow stillness in its wake. He read the pages, his breathing growing ragged. After 10 minutes that felt like an eternity, he picked up the pen we had provided. His signature, once a bold, confident slash, was now a shaky, broken line. He slid the document back and stood up, not looking at any of us. He was a broken man, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the 25-year-old boy I had married, lost and defeated. But that image vanished as quickly as it came. He walked out of the room without another word. The next day, I had Jessica brought to my office. She walked in looking terrified, her face pale and her eyes wide. She was expecting to be fired, to be publicly shamed. She stood before my desk, my father's desk, twisting her hands. I let the silence hang for a moment before speaking, my voice even. "Jessica," she flinched. "Ms. Sterling Miller, your ambition is noted," I said, cutting her off gently but firmly. "But your judgment is poor. You hitched your wagon to a man who was lying to everyone, including you. You thought he was the future of this company. You were wrong." I leaned forward slightly. "However, you also made a choice in the end, a smart one. So you're not fired. But you won't be working here in Charlotte anymore." I watched as a flicker of hope and confusion crossed her face. "There's an opening in our satellite office in Boise, Idaho. It's a junior marketing position. The same salary, no bonus. Consider this a second chance to earn a career honestly. There won't be a third." Her mouth opened, then closed. Tears welled in her eyes. Whether of relief or dismay, I couldn't tell. "Thank you," she whispered, and I simply nodded, dismissing her. My justice wasn't a fiery explosion. It was a cold, precise recalibration. Months passed. The divorce was finalized in a quiet, sterile courtroom. A simple affair, since Robert had already signed away everything. Sterling Solutions, under new leadership, began to thrive. The old boys club mentality that Robert had cultivated began to dissolve, replaced by a culture of merit and innovation. I'm sitting in my office now, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows. The late afternoon sun glints off the Duke Energy Center, bathing the city in a warm, golden light. My conference call with our partners in Singapore just ended successfully. My schedule for tomorrow is packed, but for the first time in my life, it's a schedule of my own making. I look at my reflection in the window, at the woman staring back at me. She looks older, yes, There are lines around her eyes that weren't there a year ago, but her eyes are clear. The woman I was, the supportive wife living in the shadow of her husband's career, is gone. I don't miss her. I mourned the life I thought I had, but I didn't mourn the person I had to be to live it. For 40 years, I helped build a man's dream. Now, I was finally building my own, on the foundation of a company that was my birthright. A sense of deep, quiet peace settled over me. It wasn't triumph, it was purpose.